boy. Hello, everybody. Look how fuzzy it is. Let's see if I can fix that. Oh man. Let me know if you can hear me at least. Let's. What do I do about this, huh? Let's see here. Yeah, huh? There it goes. Oh, and look at my hair. I look like I'm the heat miser, huh? All right, everybody. Here we go. Number, what is it? 264 or something like that. Anybody have any questions? You know, I did get a question from one of my students. Says he changed his embouchure. Now, do you know what? If you changed your embouchure and you're playing higher now, that's not an embouchure change. Let's talk about that, right? If you, quote unquote, changed your embouchure and it didn't set you back, you probably did not change your embouchure. And I want to stress right now that, at least in my little world, right? I'm always saying that because, you know, everything makes sense as long as you don't hop outside of my jurisdiction, so to speak, right? Everything I say makes sense until you start taking into account what other people teach and say and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so I have things figured out and worked out, and within my world, things do work, and they work the way they should work. So in that perspective, within that context, the purpose of changing an embouchure is to undo stuff that you did wrong. And I mean fundamentally wrong. I mean, a proper embouchure change takes months. A proper embouchure change takes months. You don't just. Now, I do teach what I call embouchure adjustment. And embouchure adjustment is when you, for example, uh, you know, you guys have seen the video where I talk about the breathing technique, right? Breathing order or something like that. I don't remember what I call it. And I talk about how you make the embouchure first, then you breathe, then you place the embouchure on the lips. I might have gotten that backwards. So make the embouchure. Right. So make the embouchure, put the horn on the lips, and then breathe either through your nose or through the corners, but don't stop the embouchure. Don't undo the embouchure. And if you are in the middle of adjustment, um, you want to hold that and breathe through your nose if you're going through an adjustment. So, yes, what is that the cure for? That's the cure for people who put the horn up. They put the horn up, put the pressure on without making the embouchure first, and then they breathe. Okay, they breathe, which, let me tell you what happens when you do that. It spreads the lip out underneath the mouthpiece. That breath, when you breathe like that, with making that much space to breathe, that's the beginning of, we talk all the time here about the inflammation-based embouchure. That breath is the beginning of that inflammation-based embouchure. When you, I'm not saying that everyone that breathes that way has an inflammation-based embouchure. I'm not saying that, but you are well on your way. When you do it that way, you put the instrument up. Notice I'm not making an embouchure. Put the instrument up. And then after you breathe like this, when you come back, the lip beneath the mouthpiece is still pinned down. It's still just as spread out as it would have been if you were playing on the infamous smile embouchure, right? What they were teaching 150 years ago is that you play like this. Well, people figured out that wasn't true. That didn't work. So yes, when I see somebody who has that kind of breathing, we will do an embouchure adjustment. It's not an embouchure change. An embouchure change is basically when you put the mouthpiece in an entirely different position. So David says, hello, David. I changed my embouchure to muscle-based using buzzing, etc. over a year ago, and am now just now starting to get tone, range, and endurance. It was worth it. I agree with that. I think it's worth it too. I think it's worth it. The best benefit of having a muscular embouchure is you're free to do whatever you want. You can practice or you cannot practice, and it's not going to affect you physically. You can, there's all kinds of, and flexibility and stuff like that. That's awesome. Hello, Kevin. Kevin says, David, same here based on what Mr. Lewis's lessons have taught me. Pressure embouchure caused me a lip rip injury. Yeah. So yes, that student that I'm talking about, and I won't mention his name, and I'm not putting him down. He's a high school student, and I would have to say that he's one of the best high school students I've taught in a long, long time. But he sent me an email, and he says, I changed my embouchure, and now I'm playing a big fat F sharp above the staff, above the high C. And I'm like, you probably did not change your embouchure. I can't wait to see him on his next lesson, to see what he's talking about. But I can promise you that wasn't an embouchure change. He might be doing something different that's helping him play higher. It's not an embouchure change. I promise you that. I promise you that. All right. Any questions? Yeah, we get all the time emails from people that want me to help them, and they'll say, like on Facebook posts, not Facebook, YouTube posts and stuff like that. And they'll say, I'm having trouble with the buzz. Can you help me? Um, what am I supposed to do with that? I'm having trouble with the buzz. Will you now read my mind and tell me what's going wrong? Right? There's nothing I can do to help somebody with their lip buzz other than to speak in generalities. And if you did, that video that they keep commenting on covers all those generalities. Um, and if you're trying to do that stuff that I say in that video, and then um, it doesn't work for you, and you say to me, "I need your help, please. Um, tell me what I need to do to get the lip buzz," right? That's not possible. It's not possible. Kevin says, I have a question, but it's kind of complicated. If players like Rafael Mendez played out of the side of the mouth and did so at a world-class level, then aperture size could not have been much of a factor because you can't purse your lips on the side. Well, let's talk about aperture size and the question is, what role does aperture play? This is right along with everything else I've been saying about the range and all of that. Let's put it this way. You know how in math you have, like in algebra, you have a variable that represents what you don't know. Okay? So um, let's say that the um, aperture is such a variable. Okay? But unlike algebra, we can't solve it. Even if you had a high-speed camera that could go inside the mouthpiece, and they have those. Even if you could measure what the aperture was doing while the video was being, video was recording, that has nothing to do with what's going on inside of your mouth later when you're playing. So even if you had access to such cameras, how would that even help you? Because you don't know what's going on while you're doing it. And so now to add that, so the only camera stuff that we have access to is when someone else had their embouchure changed. Now, how does that help you? That doesn't help you at all. So the when we talk about the aperture that talk that we talk about is completely abstract and theoretical. And that's true for everybody, whether or not they agree with me or not. It's still abstract and theoretical because of this situation. You can't feel what your aperture is doing. You don't know how big it is. It can, sometimes. Let's talk about this too. What what the aperture has become is a form of trumpet visualization. So you can say to yourself, make the aperture smaller, make the aperture bigger. You can say that stuff to you, to your own mind. Your teacher can tell you that. Make the aperture smaller, make the aperture bigger, and something will change. Did the aperture actually change? We don't know that. We don't know if the aperture is bigger, aperture is smaller. And even if we could see it, how are you going to measure it? So no, I you you've probably noticed, except for in a completely theoretical context, I don't talk much um about the aperture. Now, where when I do talk about the aperture, I talk about aperture control. Once again, it's all theory. It's all theory. I believe that when we do the lip buzz, I mean not lip buzz, the lip bends, that you are practicing aperture control. And I believe when you do the pedal tones, once again, you are practicing aperture control. And by being able to control that stuff that way, you now have tools at your disposal for playing the trumpet better. But as far as closing and opening the aperture, that's abstract and it's just a theory, and I don't know. There's another context where I talk about the aperture because the aperture is most definitely one of the sources of resistance that fights against the air, right? But the aperture is just one of 7 sources. So you could have an open aperture, but the other sources are closed. So when you add that to the equation, you see that how open or closed your aperture is, even if you could get in there and measure it, almost has nothing to do with nothing. As a way to learn how to play better, aperture is it's a fairy tale. I know that a lot of people would be upset with me saying that. These are those things that I've spent my entire adult life working through, thinking through them, figuring out what's real, what's not real. Oh, here's my service animal. Pearl calls, this is Toki, and Pearl calls Toki my service animal. She comes and she makes me feel better. when I'm not feeling good, she comes and purrs and purrs and purrs and purrs, and I hope I make her feel better too. All right, David says, with my new embouchure, my aperture feels a lot smaller throughout the range, and my old loose flabby embouchure. Oh, then my old loose flabby embouchure. And so, and don't get me wrong, in the realm of music, especially trumpet, stuff that's theoretic, stuff that is, I told you earlier that the oh, she's slobbering all over me. I told you earlier that the whole aperture thing was more like a visualization because you can actually say to yourself, bigger aperture, lower aperture, smaller aperture, and it will change what's coming out of the horn. But the fact that we don't have any way to prove that makes it nothing more than just mental. But this is my point. What I'm getting at is just mental is just as legitimate. Remember what I say, because great trumpet playing is um, over 90%, over 99% mental, what we think has power. So when I say it's just mental, I don't mean in a dismissive way. It's not dismissive. I'm not saying what it's just mental, therefore it's not real. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I do believe that it's important to know what's what. Even though things aren't real, doesn't mean they're not effective. And that's how I feel, by the way, about all the stuff I call trumpet lore. There's so many of the stories I was told when I was growing up, when I was being educated, so many stories I was told that ended up not being true. But it doesn't matter. I like to compare them to fairy tales and the old Grimm stories and all that stuff. This is trumpet lore. And the reason we tell those stories is because they're effective. The stories themselves are effective tools for teaching. And now that we know that trumpet playing is mostly mental, those stories have impact. We can understand that even though they're not true, they have impact on the way we play. And it's the same thing with a lot of the stuff breathing from the abdomen. I mean, from the not breathing. You do breathe from the diaphragm. Okay, breathing is for inhale, not exhale. But there's people that say support from your diaphragm, support from your diaphragm. Um, it's not true. And people all over the internet will tell you it's not true. But what they won't tell you is that that still works, right? Even though it's not true, it still works. So a lot of this stuff is like that. And yes, the aperture is squarely right on there. The aperture fits what I'm talking about perfectly. And I will even go as far, I don't know how many of you guys have read, not read, but watched my video about the lip buzz controversy. And even though I think what these guys say that you can't buzz and get a good sound on the trumpet, even though I disagree with them completely, that doesn't mean their method doesn't work. Their method does work. Ooh, fish breath. Their method works. Now, why did I have to make a video if their method works? Because they're trying to tell me that my method doesn't work, right? That's why I had to make a video, because they're out there trying to say that it's impossible to do lip buzz and get a good sound. Obviously, that's not true. And with those people, I just don't understand. They tell you that it's impossible to do a lip buzz and get a good sound, and then you say, well, what about the thousands of people who do lip buzz and get a good sound? Well, how do you explain that? And it's just like politics. They change the subject. They won't answer it. It really is just like politics. Because they can't, what kind of answer are they going to give to that? Huh? They've been teaching that for all that time, right? Some of them have been teaching this for decades. They've been teaching this way for decades. And now you ask them to explain why some people can do lip buzz on a regular basis and still have a good sound. Huh? Yeah, I think it's very interesting. So I also put, by the way, I also put in that same category where it's abstract. I consider, and a lot of people, abstract and theoretical. A lot of people get bent out of shape over these two subjects. Intonation, intonation is abstract and not physical. We want to put our little tuner on. That tuner, it's just like what I said about having a camera to see how big your aperture is. Putting the tuner on to see what your note is doesn't tell you anything. That is not useful information. I do believe in what I call calibrating my trumpet. And yes, I use a tuner for that. We don't use a tuner to tune your music because that's not how music works. And most advanced musicians know this. It's the band directors and the the low level teachers that will say sit in front of the tuner and tune every note. Oy, oy, oy. And let me tell you this, because we can't measure it, it's only what we hear, right? If it sounds in tune, it is in tune. Um, because of that, it's cultural. You guys have heard me say this before. It's cultural. Okay? It's cultural. Playing in tune is cultural. You play in tune so that the people you're playing with think it sounds good. And that's it. And the other thing that falls in this same category, what was it? It's always two. I can't remember the next one. So intonation. Oh, wait, what was the other one? But it's one of those same kinds of things, right? Where we think it's physical. We think we can measure it. I can't. I'll remember as we go. Um, it's something that we actually think is etched in stone, and it's not at all. But like I said, and I know I'm repeating myself, so range is in that category, but that's not what I'm trying to remember. It's one of those things that people think, just like they want to think it's scientific and mathematical, just like intonation. Um, when indeed it's not at all. It's abstract. It's abstract. Any other questions? You know, once we break loose from the trumpet pseudoscience, once we stop, and by the way, let's talk about why do they try to make all this stuff more scientific? It's because they want their voice to count more than someone else's voice. They want to they want to be able to say, I am correct and you are wrong, and here's the science to prove it. That's why they do all this science stuff. And once you break away from that kind of thinking, once you break away from that, it liberates you. It's an amazing thing. It liberates you. Now you have the freedom to be expressive. Now you have the freedom to do things in a way that sounds good to you, because when you get down to it, that's the most important thing. It has to sound good to you. What you do needs to sound good to you. You know, I do believe I would have more students if I didn't teach this way. Because people want that confidence. People desire that confidence. If I tell them, you know what, the most important thing is that it sounds good to you. And then they go, let's say we're talking about a high school student, and they go on the audition for all state, and they don't make all state. And they come back to me they say, I thought you said that the most important thing is that it has to sound good to me. Well, then why didn't I make all state? Not a deep thinker, huh? The issue is nothing guarantees you're going to make all state. You, even with the right teacher, even with all the right information. So, nothing guarantees it. Nothing guarantees that someone else is going to like your playing. So now when I say you liking how you sound is the most important thing, I never said it was all important. You do have to, when you're playing with other people, you do have to try to play the way they play. And that is, by the way, the only justification that I see in having those kinds of teachers. And I think the orchestra world is the best example of this. The orchestra teachers are like gatekeepers for that music. And I don't have a problem with it whatsoever. If you want to be in an orchestra, I have said this since the beginning of my channel. If you want to be in an orchestra, go to them, not to me. I can help you with your fundamentals and stuff like that. I cannot get you into an orchestra. Now, technically, with what I just said, neither can they. But at least if you take lessons with the gatekeepers, at least you're halfway there. But what I will do is caution you that the way they speak is not legit. The way they speak is in a totality. They speak in a way that says this is the right way and anything else is wrong. And that's not really how it works. What they should be saying, if they were accurate, is within the culture that I exist, this is how we do it. That's how it works. Um, I had another student this last week. He's a mariachi student, and his goal is to get a degree in mariachi education and be a mariachi band director in the schools. And I asked him, and it's my mistake for not looking into it myself. I asked him, "Do you go through?" Because I know that a lot of the jazz degrees, you have to go through the classical department to get to the jazz degree. So you still have to learn classical etudes and stuff like that. You still have to get into the school with classical materials. But the student said no, that it's mariachi and he doesn't have to learn the classical stuff. Well, turns out this week he found out he's got to audition for the school, right? And you know that mariachis, they do things very, very, very differently. You know, we uh, one of the first things that we try to do with high school students is to get them to stop swirling the notes, right? Right? If you swirl the notes, it's considered not classical. And there's reason for that. I won't go into it. But if you swirl the notes, they're gonna think that you're a terrible player. Most of everything else he does is gonna fit fine with, but the swirling of the notes it's got to be fixed for the classical stuff. Um, but yes, so you see what I mean by cultural. That swirling of the notes sounds good to the mariachi people. And in fact, I like the way it sounds myself personally. I would never play that way outside of mariachi. But yes, it is cultural. David says, I will cover this in our lesson, but how to transition from memorized lines, motifs, or transcriptions to true improvisation just happens over time. That's actually the right answer. It just happens over time. You can speed it up and make it take less time. How do you do that? You actually execute the motifs over a track. And then, you know that you guys know, those of you who are taking jazz lessons with me, you know I have what I call improvisation and improv exercises. The whole purpose of the improv exercise is to influence what comes out in your improv. So what's the difference? The difference is on the improv, when you're actually doing real improv, you're not thinking about anything. When you're doing an improv exercise, you are thinking about something. You are striving to do something while you're improvising. That's the difference. So you can take these um, just random, either random 251 licks, random transcription segments, random uh, motif licks, and insert them into the solo. Now that might surprise you because I'm always outspoken about not playing that way, but it's a legitimate way to practice. Where you, and in fact, this is something we haven't gotten to yet. We will later. One of the advanced things that I do with the jazz students is have them write what I call a forced motif written solo, a forced motif etude, right? And what do you do with that? You take the motif that you want to be able to play over that song. You write an etude that crams it in there. Okay? You cram it everywhere it can fit. And then you memorize that etude and then you throw it away. Now, I say it's for my advanced students. There's no reason why you guys can't just do that on your own. I call it a forced motif etude. Now, for it to be what I invented, one motif, except we have supporting motifs, but what I'm talking about is the etude. In fact, the way I write it is I write that etude everywhere that I see in the changes that it'll fit, and then I use random, almost random supportive motifs. I have a feeling I just said that all wrong. Let me back up and say it again. I get a piece of paper that has the changes on them. I put that motif. We're talking about normally just 5 notes. I put that motif everywhere that it'll fit. And by the way, if it's a song that changes keys, then it's going to be in every key that the song goes through. And I put it in there, the motif is first. Then I fill in the places between those motifs. So let's say we're doing a G blues, and I put the first motif. That's the motif I'm gonna put throughout the blues. A um I'm gonna make a forced motif etude out of it, right? The next chord that will fit is the second measure. Then we have the next measure. So I might not do 4 measures in a row, so it would be something like. Okay, so you see what I just did? Normally, when I'm writing it down, I wouldn't take so long to figure it out, but you saw what I did. I had that motif at the beginning, the second bar, and the third bar. And I'm going to keep coming back to that motif everywhere that it's appropriate. And yes, you memorize a motif solo like that. and then put it away. A fourth motif etude. Memorize it and then put it out of your head. And yes, that will speed is still just happens over time as you put it, but it happens over a little bit less time when you do it that way. I hope that makes sense. And so there's other stuff that we can do too. Another kind of etude that I like to teach the students is called a wish list etude. The wish list etude is when you write everything you wish you could play. Right? Write the exact solo that you wish you could play if you were improvising. Memorize that and forget it. But yes, a less work intense version of that is what I said originally. Just plug and play as many motifs in your improv as possible. That would be an improv exercise, not a genuine improvisation. In fact, I don't have a. Let me write an etude real quick. I'll have to do it on. Oh, I've got in my briefcase. I'll put it in my briefcase. I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is have. Oh, how did that happen? Four bars on each line, and it's a blues, so it's going to be 3 lines. This is a very important part of it. I won't put the chords, so this is what I start with. Now let's put the motif. I didn't give myself much room, but we'll make it work. And like I said, this is a etude I have not written yet. So I'm not just doing this by memory. I'm actually really writing this etude. I like to keep the connective. I like to keep the connective motifs simple. That way you're not struggling while you learn it. So you keep the connective motifs simple. And by the way, so I see right now I'm doing something that has repetition in it. The first measure is now identical to the fourth measure. I don't have a problem with that. I actually learned. So here's what I've got so far. And I don't have a problem with the repetition. And this might not be the best one I ever wrote because I usually check on my horn. Oh, do you know what I didn't? Huh? Now we've got two lines. I didn't follow what I told you because in this the I wasn't sure rhythmically where I was going to place it. Okay, that's what I've got so far. Let me play it for you. And then the last note. I'll play it one more time. So obviously that sounds like an exercise. But it's an exercise that's based on the chord progressions and it's dripping with language all the way through it. So yes, this is the kind of thing you can do to force that process to happen faster. Yes, it's that depends on what kind of motif it is, right? David says, if is the motif relational depending on the notes of the chord? Yes, that's right. So in this case, we're mostly doing on the fifth and the seventh of the chord. That said, let me be clear about that because that motif, I'm gonna circle. I'm gonna circle in red every time it happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 times that motif happens in a 12-bar blues. And what we have here, let me put the chord progression that I was thinking when I wrote it. We have the A minor 7, the D7. So this is what I wanted to show you. In the A minor 7, it goes from, it's highlighting the third of the A minor. And the D7, it's highlighting the seventh. It's the same two notes. Right, it's not the same notes every time, but it's not, let's not say that it's related to the chord in the sense that you could do it over every chord. That's not how it works. If it's a major chord, it won't fit. It has to be either dominant or subdominant. So it really is attached to the key. And if the chord changes the key, that's what changes which notes you're going to do. I hope that makes sense. Yes, in relation to the key, you this is a little bit before where you're at. You look at the sections of the song and you deduct what is the key for that section of the song based on the chords. So it is based on the chords, but the lick itself is based on the key. Which notes you do is based on what key you're in. So, any other questions? Now, for the songs that we're doing, for the first 6 songs in my method, they don't change keys. So it's going to be the same notes every single time. Okay? That's why I chose those songs. So, like, for example, if you're doing you're gonna try to cram that in everywhere on Black Orpheus, and I actually played Black Orpheus on Saturday night in C. Huh? That surprised me. Anyway, so yes, you're gonna if you're using if you're using the songs that we're doing at the first 5 or 6 songs, then it doesn't change. All right. Maybe I can get in one more question. Otherwise, we'll shut it down. Oh, next week. I believe it's next week. We're probably not going to have one next week. I have the busiest week I've had since I got sick. So really the busiest week I've had in 3 or 4 years at least. I have Fridays, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, I think Wednesday, I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday again, Yeah, lots and lots of gigs. Woohoo! Hmm. Back in the saddle again, right? All right, guys. Well, we'll let you go. Have a great weekend. God bless you, and we'll see you next time, okay? Bye.